Beachville is a rural village in southwestern Ontario that was founded in 1791. The village sits between Lakes Erie and Huron and is approximately equidistant between Buffalo and Detroit. Beachville also claims to be the birthplace of baseball. Now, southwestern Ontario has long had a love affair with the game of baseball. The Guelph Royals, then the Maple Leafs, were founded in 1861. London's Labatt Park, formerly Tecumseth Park, is the oldest continually operating baseball grounds in the world, with a history dating back to 1877. St. Mary's is the home of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame, while Chatham is the birthplace of Cy Young Award winner and Hall of Famer Ferguson Jenkins. And this small village you see? Well, this is Beachville. Okay, so I'd heard a couple of times about this idea that baseball may have its roots here in Canada. I'd read about it in two books by a fellow named William Humber. One was called Let's Play Ball. The other one was called All I Thought About Was Baseball. And I thought, let's confirm this. So I decided I'd come to the International Baseball Federation page. And if you go to the page, it's called The Origins of Baseball, and scroll down, you can see that there's history of baseball or bat and ball games being played all over the world, starting with Egypt and throughout Europe. You scroll down a little bit, and there it is, right underneath the Doubleday myth story about how Spalding basically wanted to sell some sporting goods, so he attached an American Civil War hero to the line, sort of like the world's first endorsement, I guess. Of course, that story of Doubleday inventing ball was not true. But if you scroll down beyond that, you get to this last sentence here. The first game of baseball played in the New World dates back to June 1838 and was played in Ontario, Canada. So now I've got verification on this website and from a few books. Both books were written by a professor at Seneca College named William Humber. I thought it was time to go check out what Bill had to say.
I think you'd be surprised. I think it would be surprising.
William Humber wears many hats. Not only is he a selector for Canada Sports Hall of Fame and Baseball Hall of Fame, he's a recipient of a Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal, the chair of continuing education at Seneca College, and the director for the Office of Echo Seneca Initiatives. In addition to all of this, he's written a dozen books, and every year he runs the spring training for baseball fans class at Seneca College.
For year 35 that you'd like to share with us. Yeah. Buffalo, Bill James. Okay. Buffalo, Bill James. Good. Yeah. And I'm gonna put down another one here. Babe Ruth. We're gonna try and bring him out too. Well, thank you very much for another season. Thank you.
Tell me about the genesis of the baseball class, spring training for baseball fans.
Well, a good story. I started at Seneca College in 1977, and I worked in the area broadly defined as continuing education. So in 1978, I concocted this idea of a baseball course, basically called it Baseball Spring Training for Fans, on the notion that the players go to Florida to get ready for the season at that time. Where do the fans go? Well, they should come to Seneca College in those dark months of January and February and early March and talk baseball.
Tell me about some of the more entertaining guest speakers that you've had over the years.
Oh, wonderful people. W.P. Kinsella came in one year. This before he became the famous W.P. Kinsella. He was riding around North America in a Volkswagen Beetle and trying to convince people that he was going to become a great writer, which of course he did become, and of course the immortal Shoeless Joe, which became the movie Field of Dreams, came out of that. Paul Quarrington, the late Paul Quarrington, he was one of the notable personalities who read from one of his books. And more recently, Dave Bedini, who talked about baseball in Italy, where he had been 10 years before and had talked about the game. But we've had players, we've had great members of the Blue Jay organization. Pat Gillick, Paul Beeston have come out multiple times. Jesse Barfield, that was quite a memorable day with Jesse in the class. And then women who had played in the All-American Girls Baseball League. We had a fellow who had played in the Negro Leagues. Many of these people are no longer with us now, but we were very fortunate to kind of get them at a time when they still had very fresh memories of those lost days, you might say, of baseball.
So let's talk about Beachville and the impact of what Beachville means to Canadian baseball.
Well, June 4th is a very significant day, at least it was in the British calendar. It was Military Muster Day. It was a day when you got the troops together, you might march around a bit, and then seemingly you would drink for the rest of the day. It was a public holiday. And about 50 years after that game in Beachville, on the 4th of June, 1838, Dr. Adam Ford, who was by now resident in Denver, wrote a letter to the Sporting Life magazine and described in extraordinary detail a game of baseball, or at least early primitive baseball, he had witnessed in Beachville on that day in 1838.
The 4th of June, 1838, was a holiday in Canada, for the rebellion of 1837 had been closed by the victory of the government over the rebels, and the birthday of His Majesty George IV was set apart for general rejoicing. The chief event at the village of Beachville, in the county of Oxford, was a baseball match between the Beachville Club and the Zoras. The game was played in a nice, smooth pasture field just back of Enoch Burdock's shops. I well remember a company of Scotch volunteers from Zora halting as they passed the grounds to take a look at the game. Of the Beachville team, I remember seeing George Burdick, Reuben Martin, Adam Carn, William Hutchison, Ivan Alstein, and I think Peter Carn and some others as well. The ball was made of double and twisted woolen yarn, a little smaller than the regulation ball of today, and covered with good, honest calfskin, sewed with wax ends by Edward McNamee, a shoemaker. The infield was a square, the base lines of which were 21 yards long, on which were placed 5 bags. The distance from the thrower to the catcher was 18 yards, the catcher standing 3 yards behind the home bye. From home bye, or the knocker's stone, to the first bye was 6 yards. The club, we had bats in cricket, but we never used bats in playing baseball, was generally made of the best cedar, blocked out with an axe and finished on a shaven horse with a drawing knife. A wagon spoke or any nice straight stick would do. We had fair and unfair balls. Now, a fair ball was one thrown to the knocker at any height between the bend of his knee and the top of his head, near enough to him to be fairly within reach. All others were unfair. When a man struck at a ball, it was a strike. And if a man struck at a ball 3 times and missed, he was out if the ball was caught every time, either on the fly or on the first bound. There was no rule to compel a man to strike at a ball except the rule of honor. But a man would be despised and guyed unmercifully if he would not hit at a fair ball. If the knocker hit a ball anywhere, he was out if the ball was caught either before it struck the ground or on the first bound. The number of innings to be played was always a matter of agreement, but it was generally from 5 to 9 innings, 7 being most frequently played, and when no number was agreed upon, 7 was supposed to be the number. The old plan, which Silas Williams and Ned Dolson, these were gray-haired men then, said was the only right way to play ball. For it was the way they played when they were boys, was to play until one side made 18 or 21, and the one getting that number first won the game. There was no set number of men to be played at each side, but the sides must be equal. I frequently saw games played with 7 men on each side, and I never saw more than 12. They all fielded. The object in having the first bye so near the home was to get the runners out on the baselines, so as to have the fun of putting them out or enjoying the mistakes of the fielders when some fleet-footed fella would dodge the ball and come in home. When I got older, I played myself, for the game never died out. I played from that day on to this, and I don't intend to quit as long as there's another boy on the ground. Yours, Dr. Ford.
It's so good. It's the suspicious part of it is it's too good to be true. He remembered distances between bases. He remembered the names of every player. Now, keep in mind he was probably about 7 or 8 when the game was played. And I have no doubt that something occurred there. I think we make it bigger than it was because there were lots of references throughout North America, both in Canada and the United States, to early forms of baseball, early bat and ball type games being played in this period and long before this period, even back into the 18th century, baseball type games. So it certainly fits within that pattern. I think what he was describing when he got into the rules was actually the game he probably played as a young man in the 1850s when he had come back into the St. Mary's area of Ontario, having studied at McGill, and he came back to Ontario and he played a game that we now know was very popular, the Canadian game of baseball, which had 11 men on the field, which had a backstop and a fourth baseman as the other two positions, which had somewhat similar rules to cricket. In other words, you had to retire every batter before the inning was over, and it was only a 2-inning game. I think that's what he was really kind of describing in some manner or other. Not everything lines up in his account with the Canadian game of the 1850s, but enough does that I think we can say probably he took those remembrances, applied them to what he had seen, and I think it was legitimately seen as a kid in 1838, and put the two together into an account that now in the mid-1880s he was recalling and writing about for the sporting life. We do know that, for instance, in the town of York in the early part of the 19th century, Joseph Plater in his diary wrote about playing something that could have been baseball, in around 1805 in Toronto. It's not an account of a game. We don't even know if the ball that he was meaning was baseball or cricket or something else resembling that. We just don't know. We know that in 1841 there's an account in the Nova Scotian newspaper, Joseph Howe's newspaper, about bat and ball being played on a holiday. So that's a pretty legitimate account. We know that ball itself was banned in Ontario on the Lord's Day, Sunday, in 1845, but again the description says ball. Was that baseball? Was it bowling? Was it some other configuration of sport? We don't know and probably never will know. But it's significant in the sense, I think, that its detail means that we probably have some degree of recognition that he was describing something that was very popular in Ontario around this time, around this period, and which goes a long way to explain why the game caught on in such a huge way, particularly in southwestern Ontario in the 1860s. And by the 1870s, you had two Canadian teams, London and Guelph, members of the International Association, the first serious rival to the National League, suggesting to me that long before the Toronto Blue Jays and the Montreal Expos, we had Major League Baseball in Canada, very near to Toronto in southwestern Ontario.